Hey, Chris here from IeltsAdvantage.com. Hope that you're all doing well. And in this video, what we're going to look at is particularly for Indian students, but it's applicable to pretty much the whole world. So we're going to be talking about the 4 main reasons why Indian students fail the IELTS test. And this is based on like about 25% of our VIP group is Indian, about 25% of all our internet traffic comes from India. So we work with Indian students every single day. Not all Indian students are exactly the same, of course, it's a big place, but we noticed patterns with a lot of students, and we noticed 4 common things that were causing a lot of problems for Indian students. But as I said, many of the things that we're going to talk about are very, very useful no matter where you're from. Okay, so number 1, pronunciation. Okay, so there's 2 main issues with pronunciation for Indian students. Number 1 is accent interference, and number 2 is rapid speech. So accent interference is when your accent interferes with your English pronunciation. So it causes difficulty for the listener, causes problems for clarity, for the listener to understand what you're saying. So for many Indian students that I deal with, they think that they have to change their accent, or they think that they have to sound more British or more American. So this is not true. This is a misunderstanding. We have many Band 8, Band 9 Indian students who got Band 8, Band 9 on the speaking test that kept their Indian accent. But what they focused on was speaking extremely clearly with their Indian accent. The problem comes for many Indian students is when they try to sound British or they try to sound American, and they really waste a lot of time trying to change their accent rather than just keeping their accent and focusing on speaking as clearly as possible. The other thing with many Indian students is they speak extremely quickly sometimes, especially not all the time, but maybe 3 or 4 words in a sentence, and they'll say them really, really, really quickly. So I call it like machine gun speech, like da-da-da-da-da. And it's extremely difficult to understand if there's problems with accent interference and rapid speech. So accent interference, most of the time it's no problem. You know, not all, but nearly all IELTS students have an accent from their home country, and that's normally not an issue. It's normally not a problem. But when you combine a strong Indian accent with speaking very, very quickly, there are times when you just have no idea what the student has said to you. And if you're hoping to get a Band 7 or above in the speaking test, the examiner should really be able to understand 100% of what you're saying. So how can you improve this? So rapid speech, quite easy. Slow down a little bit. You're not going to get extra marks for speaking quickly. Also, if you slow down and relax a little bit, for many of you, you're speaking quickly also because you're nervous or you're stressed out. But slowing down can also help your fluency. It can also help your grammar and your vocabulary, because your brain cannot keep up with the rate of speech. Your brain needs to be able to process everything. So by slowing down, you're allowing your brain to process, the grammar and the vocabulary a little bit better. So slowing down will help all areas. Don't speak really slowly, but for a lot of you, if you recorded yourself and listened back to yourself, you would be shocked at how quickly you're actually speaking. So slowing down a little bit can help. With accent interference, number 1, don't be ashamed of your accent. A lot of the students that we work with, especially not just India, many countries, they want to sound British because they think that there's something wrong with their home accent. There's nothing wrong with your accent. Try not to think of it that way. You should be proud of where you're from, but work on clarity. Work on making everything you say as clear as possible, and that will help. Number 2, fear of repetition. Now this comes from, like many things, poor teaching. Many Indian IELTS teachers are great. Many of them are amazing and know exactly what they're doing. Many of them have no idea what they're doing. So we get emails from teachers all the time, basically saying, "Hello, Chris, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me?" You shouldn't really be taking money from students and helping students if you don't know what you're doing. And because if you don't really know what you're doing, you're going to be giving bad advice. One of the worst things you can say to an IELTS student is, you can never repeat any words. And that's what a lot of you have been told. You've been told by your IELTS teacher, don't repeat words. If you repeat words, you'll get a low score. So let's think about that for a second. Let's think about articles. Can you write a whole essay without repeating those? No. Prepositions. Can you write a whole essay without repeating some prepositions? No. And there are many other words that you just have to use many times. Also, think of some words that are impossible to change. Names and dates, for example. You just can't change a date. 1921 is 1921. New York City is New York City. Chris Pell is Chris Pell. You can't change that to something else, and you have to repeat those words. So a lot of students, they'll get a question and it will say, you know, in New York City in 1921, and they're like, oh, how do I change this? And they do actually try and change it to something else. I seen one student the other day that changed like 1921 to 21 years after 1900. It's like, that's a bit ridiculous. You should vary your language as much as possible, but there will be certain words that you just have to repeat, and there also will be a lot of words that you can't change because you're not capable of changing them. So this is the biggest problem. The biggest problem is teachers telling the students, you can't repeat a word. So students think that they have to change every single word, you know, that every word in their essay is unique. And they just do not have the ability, the linguistic ability, to change, you know, a common word like car or woman or man 7 times. They just don't have that ability. So what they do instead is they change it to something that's wrong. So that leads to mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. If you hope to get a band 7 or above in your writing, most of your sentences should not have grammar and vocabulary mistakes. So by telling students don't repeat any words, you're pretty much guaranteeing that most of them are going to fail. So it's terrible advice. And another thing that we see a lot with Indian students is this is for writing task 2. They will look at a sample essay and they'll look at a conclusion, and the conclusion will be a summary of the main ideas in the rest of the essay. Many Indian students say, oh, you can't do that. You repeated the same ideas. This comes from a misinterpretation of the marking criteria. Many Indian teachers who don't know what they're doing, and I'm not saying all Indian teachers do this, but many do, they take that idea that you can't repeat words and they misinterpret it as you can't repeat ideas anyway. So a conclusion is the summary of your main ideas. You're going to have to repeat the main ideas if you're going to write an effective conclusion. Your conclusion shouldn't have brand new ideas in it. That's a new main body paragraph. That's not a conclusion. So again, this comes from poor teaching, and you should be aware of this. As I say, many Indian teachers are great. To go with those teachers. Don't go with a teacher who, you know, got a band 8 last week and all of a sudden they're an IELTS teacher. Or someone who, you know, just wants to make as much money as possible, so opens up an IELTS school, calls himself an IELTS expert, in the hope that they'll make lots of money. Those schools obviously don't last very long because there'll be lots of students who fail, but do be very careful. Number 3, use of high-level language. Instead of, again, this comes down to teaching. This is not the student's fault. One thing I used to do with my students was on the first day of class, if we were doing a writing task 2 course, let's say an 8-week course, one of the first things I would do is I would give them a band 9 essay and I'd give them a band 6 essay. And I'd say to the students, which is the band 6 and which is the band 9? Nearly every student said that the band 6 was band 9 and the band 9 was band 6. Why was that? Because they'd been taught that a good essay has lots of high-level language in it. Use high-level language if you want, but you must do it accurately. There's no point in memorizing a bunch of words or a bunch of phrases, or what we see a lot with Indian students is memorizing lots of idioms or proverbs or quotes and inserting them into their essay. A terrible idea. And it really comes down to a misunderstanding of the official marking criteria. It's people teaching the exam who've never been examiners, that don't know the official marking criteria, that don't know what it means. Telling a student that they should use lots of high-level grammar, high-level vocabulary is like, imagine going to the gym and you can only lift 50 kilograms. Imagine your trainer at the gym tells you to lift 150 kilograms. You're going to kill yourself. You're going to drop a weight on your head. You should lift the weight that you're capable of using. Same with writing. You should use the language you're capable of using. Always try and improve your grammar. Always try and improve your vocabulary. But many teachers are teaching you quick fixes and shortcuts and tips and hacks. Those do not work. So they're advertising to students, telling them, you know, come to my school and I'll fix your writing in 5 days or 6 weeks or something like that. So you can't if you do that, you can't really turn around to a student and tell them, actually it's going to take you much longer than that to learn vocabulary and grammar. They'll just give you a list of words to memorize. You'll never be able to use those properly in an essay. So be very careful with this. Always be improving your grammar, always be improving your vocabulary, but the focus should be on accuracy. It's impossible to get a 7 or above in writing if most of your sentences have errors in them, grammar errors, vocabulary errors. Impossible. So think about that next time you try and use so-called high-level vocabulary. Number 4, and this is something particularly common with Indian students, not all of them. It's also common in other places, but particularly in India, there seems to be a huge number of myths and rumors about the test. Like I'll get emails from students saying, I heard that if I do my test in this particular city or this particular test center, that I'll get a high mark. Or you'll get one student saying do it at the BC and you'll get a high mark, and the next student will say do it at IDP. You'll get some students saying, oh, my sister's cousin told me that if you fly to this country, like students focusing on things that do not matter. All right, the things that matter on your writing test are coherence and cohesion, task achievement, grammar and vocabulary. Speaking, pronunciation, fluency, grammar, vocabulary. Very rarely do I get students emailing me, asking me, for example, how do I improve my pronunciation? How do I improve my fluency? You'll get students emailing you worried and stressed out about some rumor, some myth that they've heard about the test. That means that you're not focusing, you're not spending enough time on improving the things that actually matter. It shouldn't take a genius to figure out that if you spend your whole time worrying about little things that have no effect on your score and no time on the things that do affect your score, you're going to be in trouble. So those are the 4 things. As I said, not all Indian students, but many of them, when we work with them, we're seeing those patterns with Indian students. In the comments below, let me know, are these applicable to you? Do you do any of these things? Let me know. Do you agree with me, disagree with me? I'd love to hear from you. And I'll be checking the comments later and I'll reply to your, if you have just a general IELTS question as well, I'll answer. So, many of you have questions already. So if you're watching live right now, you can ask a question. And Sarabjit, hi from India here. Good. Info Hunter TV. What is the cost of VIP classes for all 4 sections? $500 US. Sir, tell me which nation is beneficial for student like Canada, Australia, New Zealand? I don't understand the question. Do you mean which country is better to study in, or I don't understand. Majunath Garam. Hi Chris, I have exam on June to 7 is basically the same thing. You need to go to an expert, someone who knows what they're doing. They will tell you exactly why you're getting 5.5 and show you exactly what you need to do in order to improve from 5.5 to 7. But be very careful, make sure that person knows what they're doing. Just like if your car was broken down, you wouldn't, bring it to the first person you see. You would, call around and go to someone who knows what they're doing. Because if you don't, you're going to get a lot of trouble. So that's what I would suggest. Milan, hi Chris, how can we improve fluency? Good question. It's going to be quite a long answer though. There are many reasons why people struggle with fluency. Let's talk about a few of them. Number one, if you're very stressed out and very nervous on test day, it can affect your fluency. Stress is, in the context of the Ielts test, stress is just another word for fear. You're fearful of failing the test because really you didn't prepare properly for it. People who know that they have prepared properly, that they know they're going to get the score they need, they don't have stress. There's not as much stress. So prepare properly, you'll be less stressed out on test day. Second thing, in the Ielts exam, Ielts speaking exam, is many students think very deeply about ideas. So they try and think of impressive ideas or ideas that are going to impress the examiner. There are no marks for impressive ideas in the speaking test. There's no task achievement in the speaking test. Your ideas must help you answer the question, and your ideas must be relevant to the question, but the things that are being tested are grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and fluency and coherence. Those are the things that actually matter. Your ideas don't really matter. So if you relax about the content, it's not what you say in the speaking test, it's how you say it, really. So if you do that, it'll help you with your fluency. The other thing, and this is a long-term solution, is many of you have problems with fluency because you're trying to think of the correct grammar and vocabulary. Improve your level of English and you're going to improve your fluency because you won't be thinking about the English. You won't be thinking about, what grammar do I use, what structure do I use, what tense do I use, what word do I use to describe this. It'll just be natural. So those are the three biggest things I would use to improve. Is expression important in speaking tests? I don't know what you mean by expression. Manmeet, please tell me reading tricks for academic. There are no tricks. You're not a dog. Dogs do tricks. You're a human being. Tricks, tips, hacks, shortcuts, none of that works. You want to get a high score on the reading test, improve your ability to read in English. Nearly every student who asks, how can I use tricks to get a high score on the reading test, never read in English. How do you expect to get a high score on an English reading test if you never read in English? That's pretty obvious. Jeremy Timothy, how does speed affect speaking? So it's a big misconception that fluency means speed. It's not related to speed. Fluency does not mean that if you speak really quickly, you're going to get a high mark for fluency, and if you speak slowly, you're going to get a low mark for... Listen to the rate of my speech at the moment. I'm not speaking really quickly. I'm not speaking slowly, I'm speaking smoothly. In other words, I don't have lots of pauses and hesitations and audible pauses like Those are okay. Everybody makes them. It's part of speaking. Everybody pauses and hesitates even when they're speaking their own language, but you want to reduce that as much as possible for the speaking test. So your question was, I'm speaking quite slow. You're probably not. You probably just think that. For most of my students, my advice to them in terms of fluency, a lot of them need to slow down a lot more. But I'd have to listen to you first. I couldn't really give you advice on the speed of the rate of your speech without listening to you. Is it a bad idea to write idioms or proverbs? Yes, a very, 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 very bad idea. Look at real writing. Look at how people actually write newspaper articles or academic journals especially. They never use idioms and proverbs. And if they do, it's very, very, very seldom. If your teacher tells you that you should memorize lots of idioms and proverbs and that's how you get a high score, run the other way because they do not know what they're doing. Sarah G, completely agree with you, Chris. I do not believe in these myths, but I've heard from my friends. Yeah, I don't know. I think in India, there's maybe social media is to blame, but I hear a lot of people, a lot of people email me and say, I heard this on Facebook or I heard this on Twitter, this rumor or this myth. You know, that's not an Indian problem. That's a worldwide problem. But it seems very, very prevalent in Indian society. Majunath, can you tell me some tips for reading? No. Hopefully I've explained why. Akash, in writing tasks, if we write simple ideas, will we get less bands? No, you'll probably get higher bands. The best ideas for writing task 2 are normally the simplest, most straightforward ideas. If you try and think of impressive ideas, you're wasting your time because there are no extra marks for that. You'll waste time, and also you'll probably mess it up because complex ideas are very difficult to explain and develop. Simple ideas are simple, they're easy to develop, and that's what you need to do. Good question, Priyanka. Is there a difference in allocating marks if there is an Indian examiner or an examiner from an English-speaking country? This is one of the common myths that I hear. A lot of, like, you'll hear one person saying, if you get an Indian examiner, they'll give you a higher score. And then another person will say, if you get an Indian examiner, you'll get a lower score. It doesn't matter where your examiner is from. It doesn't matter if they're a native speaker or not a native speaker. They are applying objective criteria to your writing or your speaking. They have, though that criteria does not change depending on where you're from. They receive exactly the same training. They receive exactly the same oversight. People looking at their work, checking their work. So it's the reason why the Ielts test is the most used test in the world is because it is an objective, reliable test. It's not perfect. There are many things that I don't agree. You know, there are many things that I would change if I was in charge, but I'm not. So no point in explaining what those are. What time is it? Okay, we've got about 5 more minutes, guys. So try and answer as many questions as I can, as quickly as I can. Hi Chris, I'm very weak in grammar. Identify your common grammar errors. Once you do that, then you can learn the rules of that grammar, then you can practice using that grammar, and then you can produce that grammar in sentences and get feedback on your work. That's what I would do. Rabina, speaking part 1, can I speak a little bit or more? I don't know what a little bit means and I don't know what more means, so it's impossible to answer. But your speaking part 1, your answers will generally be much shorter than part 2 and part 3. Part 1 is just normal everyday questions about you. So I don't like to give number of words or number of sentences because you shouldn't be thinking of number of words or number of sentences in the exam. You should be thinking about answering the question. But for part 1, answer the question and then add more detail, explain what you mean, or add more details, or add an example or a story about yourself. Develop it a little bit and you should be fine. Like if you're going above 5 or 6 sentences for part 1, it's probably too long. But don't write, you know, like a lot of people, you'll speak to them and you'll say like, where are you from? Like, I'm from Ho Chi Minh City. Is it a nice place? Yes. Like, those are a little bit too short. You need to develop it a little bit more than that. Priyanka, is fancy vocabulary important? Watch the beginning of this video where we talk about that. No, not as important as you think. Can you say a little bit about task 1 in writing? It is my weakness. How to understand, what should I do? I don't know if you're doing general training or academic, but I do have videos on this YouTube channel for both of those, so check those out. Let me see. What might be a good approach to generate ideas for task 2? I made a video on that 2 weeks ago, so have a look at that one. Akash, we are told to write those ideas which are 20 out of 100 lines to get a high band score in Ielts. That's the worst advice I've ever heard in my life. That is, please send me a link for whoever told you that, because I'd love to ask them why that is in relation to the official marking criteria. That's silly. The opposite of that is true. The best ideas for writing task 2 are, if you asked 100 people, most of them would think of that idea because it's the most obvious idea. You know, for example, what are the causes of global warming? Should you try and find like one little idea that not many people know about, or should you just say carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere, which 99 out of 100 people would say? That's a very, very good answer to the question. Alright guys, so that's everything that we're going to do today. Sorry if I didn't answer your question. Check out IeltsAdvantage.com. Please subscribe if you want to receive further updates from us on YouTube. So we go live at 1 p.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So please join us then, but subscribe so that you will be alerted whenever we go live, and you'll get updates on everything. If you have any other questions and I didn't answer them, please wait for the live video to stop and then go and have a look at it again and put your questions in the comments, and I'll be able to see them and reply to them. Just type out an answer. And yeah, thank you very much guys. Most of your questions are answered on IeltsAdvantage.com or videos in this YouTube channel, so check those out. Thank you very much guys. See you soon. Bye bye.